The number one thing I would say is no matter what happens in the journey of the business, there's always another move to be played. And you have to make that move bold. And at every single juncture in the business, you have to basically make a bold bet. And there's always, in every business, a way to get to the next level.
Alrighty, hello everyone and welcome to the Deal Maker Show. So today we have a really amazing founder. I think that after having done quite a bit of those episodes, as you all know, it takes quite a bit to get the thing pumping on my end. And I gotta tell you, with all the AI stuff, that is going on, all these no-code platforms, I've been using them too. I'm quite familiar with them. I think that this one is quite a timely episode. They are also just announced an incredible launch, also additional round of financing that they're adding to the books there. And it's quite the rocket ship. So we're going to be talking about how to think about co-founders, how to think about fundraising too. Obviously, the lessons learned too, when you either succeed or you learn, right? That's the way to put it. And then how to think about pivots, as well as how to think about the wave of change in AI. So I think that the episode today is going to be quite inspiring. And without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, Brad Menezes. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alejandro. Great to be here.
So originally born in Toronto. So give us a walk through memory lane. How was life growing up for you?
I grew up in a suburb of Toronto in Canada. And, my parents both in IT. And, I was actually quite entrepreneurial growing up. I started a guitar strap business, selling guitar straps as a guitar player, started an e-commerce business. But actually, there was very few big-time entrepreneurs where I grew up. And so I would spend a ton of time reading about, the entrepreneurs out in Silicon Valley. And so, where I actually met my co-founder was in high school physics class, believe it or not. And so we go back, almost 20 years.
So that whole problem solving, how do you get that thing? Because obviously you went at it with engineering as your degree, but how do you really get into this whole problem solving type of approach and way of thinking?
Yeah, I think when you go through mechanical engineering, it's basically it's almost like a physics major for the applied world, right? And so the only way you solve problems is through first principles thinking. And I think when you come into company building, it is the same thing, completely different domain, but all the principles that you learn in physics and mechanical engineering of what are the actual things that are true and must be true, and then what else is noise. There's a ton of noise when you start a company. There's a ton of noise even now with AI, and so you have to always just go back to first principles thinking. And I think that comes from my background in mechanical engineering and physics, and that's what got me into problem solving was starting with physics problems, and here we are today solving automation problems for enterprises.
I will talk about it in just a little bit. Now, one of the things that happened too is you went at it with mechanical engineering, but you realized that the action that really got your blood flowing and pumping, was not really on the mechanical side. So how do you realize that?
Yeah, it's when I started in University of Toronto doing mechanical engineering, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go build a company that's a mechanical company basically. And what I started seeing was all the startups were not in that; they were all in software. And so midway through my degree, I made a decision, which is I'm going to go into the software industry because that's where people are starting companies, and I need to find a way to get from Canada to Silicon Valley. So that was kind of the goal. And because I was reading so much, TechCrunch, all these different articles, you don't know a lot of entrepreneurs in Canada. That was kind of the first thing on my mind as soon as I graduated and I can get a visa was how do I get to Silicon Valley?
So how did you find your ticket to Silicon Valley?
Oh, it was painful. I think I must have cold emailed 100 different companies. And, one of the companies I emailed was Yelp, the restaurant reviews site. And I actually ended up getting an interview at Yelp. And they were looking for a product manager. They had just IPO'd. And they basically told me that, look, after the interviews, they told me that they really liked me, but it actually was not a fit because I was too early in my career. And so I actually ended up emailing the head of product who had interviewed me and saying, hey, like, would you be open for me being an intern and not a full time? And I'm pretty confident that it'll work out and I'll convert to be your next full time. But if not, I'll go back to Canada. And he actually took me up on that offer. And so I joined, with the wrong background, let's say mechanical engineering, into a software product management position by becoming an intern even after I graduated. And so that's how I got into Yelp. But then my career kind of went from there.
And there you made amazing relationships, such as, like getting a little bit closer to the founder of Yelp, which was quite plugged in, in the PayPal days.
Yeah. I mean, Jeremy, the founder, became a very close mentor of mine. And he's kind of, I see him as like a product genius. And his boss before he started Yelp was Elon Musk, actually. So you can imagine for me growing up, reading these magazines to eventually, working for Jeremy, from the PayPal mafia, years later, that was kind of a dream come true.
So at what point do you realize I want to maybe start something on my own and giving it that first taste of entrepreneurship?
Yeah. I mean, I think after a couple years into my career in product management, I was kind of getting the feeling like, okay, I think I know how this works. I think I can go do something on my own. And but of course, you need a co-founder. And I had been in touch with Ran, my co-founder. I met him all the way back in physics class in high school, actually. And so we were on the weekends jamming about different ideas, different companies we could start. And we actually did that for years. And then eventually I mentioned to Jeremy, the Yelp founder, I said, hey, like, I want to start a company. I want to be like you. Can you help me? And he said, hey, sure. I'm actually going to help you because you've done great work for me in Yelp. And he introduced me to Sam Altman. And what ended up happening was Sam was running Y Combinator. This is back in about 2015. And Sam funded me and Ran to do an on-demand healthcare startup back in 2015. So that was how, from working at Yelp, from going from Canada to working at Yelp to meeting Sam Altman, which, since then has become obviously one of the most famous people in our industry. That was kind of my journey to starting the first company.
So let's talk about that first company because, as they say, you either succeed or you learn. And it didn't it didn't unfold the way that you guys had hoped, but obviously those lessons are serving you guys very well for this second go at it.
Yeah, I mean, look, like the first company, what it was an on-demand healthcare company. And so the idea was it was in the era of Uber, right? Where push a button on your phone, get a nurse practitioner to your home for urgent care. So that was the idea. And what we learned the hard way was when you build a company, when you build a startup, you need to have some unfair advantage. And actually, we had an unfair disadvantage in that business, which was we were two Canadians and we didn't know the first thing about the American healthcare system and the way the insurance industry worked, which were critical pieces to running that business. And so though we got funded, we went into Y Combinator, we got it off the ground, we got some traction. We weren't able to get the insurers on board, which meant a very small subset of the population was interested in our service. And because we weren't connected, because that wasn't an industry we had any unfair advantage on, we kind of weren't able to get the company fully off the ground and in the air. And so we ended up deciding that, hey, we're not the right founders. That kind of founder market fit is critically important. We learned the hard way. And so we realized that we don't have an unfair advantage. And so what we ended up doing was actually aiming to get jobs in the enterprise software industry next, specifically in developer software for both me and Ran, my co-founder, in order to get that deep experience in unfair.
How was that day for you guys when you realized it's time to pull the plug? I'm sure that was very difficult.
That was one of the hardest things because, when you start a company, your identity becomes that company. When you wake up, you work on your company. When you go to bed, you're thinking about the company. And so that day where you decide it's time to pull the plug, this isn't working, it's not just a day, there are weeks leading up to that. And the day where you actually pull the plug on it is definitely the hardest because you even question, am I even making the right decision in that moment? Am I missing something? Is success right around the corner and we just need to make a few changes? But I think for both me and Ran, we had discussed it, for weeks on end because we weren't taking off at the level that we needed to. And I think the thing that allowed us to make that decision was that we ended up believing we were not the right founders for that idea.
Well, in terms of what to do next, you guys were quite strategic because you realized that you needed to get the right type of experience before going at it with, let's say, creating a software experience. And you and Rand also understood that perhaps, going to companies that were already in it and having your feet wet there, like would be the way to approach it. So you went to Datadog, he went to Confluent. How does that process or that journey from let's say joining that next gig to then all of a sudden like, I think this is it. I think it's time. What are the sequence of events that needed to happen for you guys to be with the aha moment of Superblocks and that day when Superblocks was born?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so I worked at Datadog, leading their second product called Application Performance Monitoring, and I got to see that was almost like a startup inside the startup. So they had their main product, infrastructure monitoring. I was leading the second product from $0 in revenue all the way up to 100 million over the 4 years. And the spark of the Superblocks idea came out of me speaking to customers who were using Datadog to monitor internal apps. And what they were doing was they really like monitoring was one small piece of the problem of what I was selling them at Datadog. The bigger problem was they had a huge backlog of these internal applications that were mission critical to their business, and they could not buy any software to help them. And so this was kind of like the other half of like what hasn't been, taken by SaaS was anything that was a little bit custom. And so the core idea for Superblocks is, could we provide these Legos or these building blocks for data integration, for authentication, for permissions, for building apps we built like a low code app builder on top of all of this. And so that was the core of the idea, and the conviction to go pursue it actually came out of many conversations. It was not a gut feel type of decision. It was one that was like very well thought through over many conversations, and we actually tried to not start the company by trying to disprove the idea as our first phase of the company, actually, to find out what are all the ways this idea could fail, because we had some scar tissue from the prior failure, actually.
No kidding. But one thing for sure is how magical this co-founder relationship that you guys have, is, all the way coming from your physics, days in high school, as you were alluding to it. I guess, co-founder relationships, they're like marriages, very similar. I think in this case, what have you learned or how is it, in terms of dynamics when a relationship like this, works so well, and how do you guys complement one another too?
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one thing in a co-founder relationship is trust, right? And you said it's just like a marriage. It's exactly like that. It takes a long time to trust someone at that level where you're basically betting your whole career on one person, right? And with Rand, my co-founder, we have this very deep level of trust because it comes out of what started as we were actually competitive in high school. We were actually not friends at first because he came into the high school and he beat me in all the classes, actually. And so first we were competitive, but I guess if you can't beat him, join him. And so we've kind of gone through this journey even of a failed company together, and we're very excited to start another company together. And so I think when you have that level of trust through ups and downs, going through the journey, and you're still excited, that's the number one thing. And then I think the second thing is you really have to complement each other, as you said. I mean, I kind of lead the product side and the sales side and the go-to-market side of the business, and he's kind of leading all of engineering. And so we have very different parts of the companies and different perspectives and different places where we spend our time. But there's also a very shared place where we both spend a ton of time, which is on the product. And so there's a massive overlap in one of the key areas. But then in terms of the day-to-day, there's lots of things where we kind of trust each other to make the calls.
So for the people that are listening to get it, what ended up being Superblocks? How do you guys make money?
Yeah, so Superblocks is a platform to enable customers to have their engineering, IT, and business teams build mission-critical apps that run their business, mission-critical internal operational apps.
Now, in that regard, you guys rolled out a pretty amazing, new launch this week. And I think it's been quite the launch. I've been following it quite closely. It has been an outstanding success, at least from what I've seen. And I guess the question that comes to mind here is, I know that you guys at one point were at a crossroads, right? And you had to do a pivot, and you were able to see AI, and it was either you join the wave and ride the wave, or you get disrupted by it. So what was that moment where you guys had to make the decision, hey, something needs to change?
Yeah, I mean, I think with our, so we started the company as a low code platform, right? And AI started incrementally happening, let's say, like post Chat GPT. And then all of a sudden, and this is maybe less than 6 months ago, even from today, all of these app generation companies in the consumer side started blowing up completely. And now anyone could prompt and build a user interface. And we had built this whole product around dragging and dropping, right? And so we were like, wow, the future is definitely AI first. It's definitely prompt to app. And so what we ended up doing is we said, can we find a way to get all the benefits of this new wave of AI, prompt to app, and kind of bet the company on that? And we had to make two fundamental changes. One is we had to make the underlying representation of a Superblocks app just raw code. So that was the first bet we made. And we put almost the whole engineering team on this bet. And the second bet was it has to be world-class AI app generation, so that this would expand who can build from not just developers and highly technical people, but to IT, to business teams, to operations teams. And so the whole business, from engineering to the business teams to IT, can build in one shared way. And so we kind of committed the whole engineering team to stop working on the old thing and move into the future of the new thing. And what I'd say was that was not an easy decision, because we're still getting customer requests at the same time for features on the existing product, right? And so this is a major evolution, and we basically launched it this week, as you said, and we're seeing the fruits of that labor, of that big bet. And I think that's probably like the biggest lesson I have about entrepreneurship is it's really not your intelligence that gets tested. It's really your courage and your ability to be bold.
And that new thing is called Clark. So, one of the things that I've seen now, I mean, obviously there is a lot of momentum more at a consumer level, where you have Lovable, you have Windsurf. I mean, Windsurf, I think it was acquired by OpenAI, for like 3 billion plus. But nothing really at an enterprise level, because the thing at an enterprise level too is that you're dealing with more complexities, whether it's security or things like that. And one of the things that I've seen too is that at a consumer level, the user is quite misaligned with the business model of the platform, because the more prompts, the more money that ultimately the platform is making. So hey, probably they're not going to fix it all within one prompt, because that goes against their business model, right? That was at least one observation that I had. How do you guys defer and really bring it to another level at the enterprise intersection, so that you're also able to deliver that value with prompts in environments where there is regulatory restrictions, where there is more complexity? Tell us a little bit about that, Brad.
Yeah, it's a great question. And in the enterprise, the constraints and requirements are completely different than in the consumer world. So in the enterprise, the first thing you're thinking about is, how does this go wrong? Security, right? And so the first thing is you have to integrate with your business data. Otherwise, you can't build anything useful in the enterprise. So first, you have to have an integrations platform, which we've built. The second thing is all of that data, you have to have a whole permissions layer over that. And so that was another thing that we built. And then any application has to be on your design system, which you have as an enterprise, right? So it's your specific enterprise components, right? And your brand. And then the next thing is anything that happens for someone logging into this app, they have to be able to log in through your SSO provider, like an Okta or something like that. And so there's, tens or hundreds of these enterprise specific policies across security and compliance and IT management that you have to solve for. And app generation is one piece of that, but app generation taking into all the context of what does someone who's actually a human do at that company building apps, can you replicate that with the AI agent? And so we spend a ton of time getting unique enterprise context and configuration so that the prompts actually deliver an experience that is specific and bespoke to that organization, not just what you get from a consumer, app builder like a Lovable or Bolt or a Replit or something like that.
That's amazing. And obviously, proof of that is what I saw. I literally saw your guys' launch and the way that people were interacting on social media. And I mean, it was like wows, like the reactions of people, which is really spectacular. I guess, obviously, to be able to develop something like this, you need money. And in your guys' case, you guys have been, quite successful at being able to get the right people at the right time, right? To be able to help you in pushing this forward. So walk us through what has been ultimately the journey of being able to raise the money, from the beginning all the way up until now. I mean, you recently this week announced, a new financing cycle that you guys just wrapped up. So I guess let's start with how much money have you guys raised and what has been the motions that needed to happen to get all that money in the bank?
Yeah, so we've raised $60 million in total, and it was across a few different financings. Our first one was when we started the company in seed. It was just an angel round of a few $1 million, right? $2 million. And that was enough to get started, to interview customers, to build an initial product. But really our Series A, which was, 37 million, right? That was kind of that plus the new financing round. That was the one where we brought in the big VC firms. So Kleiner, Perkins, Greenoak, Spark, Meritech. And that journey was a one about momentum with the business, right? And also this view of the future that we were pitching, again, a bold future as to a future where everyone can build software, right? For their businesses in a safe and secure way. And so, we've gone through many financings, and it's really important. That's like one of the big jobs, right, of the founder is to raise the money so that you can go pursue the vision. And so, we've been fortunate in that regard to partner with, people that I've read about, and we're really, really excited to meet, and now are part of the company and our backers as well.
So how were you, because I always think about money as networks more than money. And you guys have been able to do a tremendous job whether it was getting tier 1 VCs or even amazing angels and super successful entrepreneurs that you guys have also on the cap table, no? I mean, from all the top companies. So how have you guys, or what have you learned when it comes to leveraging networks in order to gain access to the right people and to get them excited to jump on board?
Yeah, I think the number one thing at the foundation is reputation. So even if you're at the point where it's before you've started the company, everyone, when you go raise money, is going to ask what you did before to the people. So, when I worked at Datadog, or my co-founder worked at Confluent, or I used to work at Yelp, all of those people got emailed, to understand how we were and what we were like to work with in order to raise the round. So the foundation is whatever you're doing, you have to just do it to the best of your ability and have a great reputation. And reputations take years, decades to build. And so I think that was kind of the first foundation of the fundraising. And then in terms of using the network, to give an example of, Jeremy from Yelp, who was my first company I worked at, it was the CEO there. He introduced me to people like Aaron Levy, to Anil Bousri, the founder of Workday. So it was actually the work that I did earliest in my career that helped with certain networks there. And then also that also helped with Datadog and some of the founders of Datadog, also with other back channels that VCs had done. So I'd say the number one thing is just to always be having a great reputation. And that is the number one thing, because especially in the early stages, it's not just about your idea. The VCs are betting a lot on what you've done, and can you parlay that into something big.
So talking about people, I want to talk about also the team at Superblocks, because I happen to know one of the guys that works with you guys, and shout out to him, Brad Wyman, who actually helped to make this episode happen. But one of the things that I've encountered, and in this case with Brad, is the fact that literally, we could be on the weekend, it's time to maybe it's a Sunday, and people will be typically like bumped about going to the office at 9 a.m. On Monday. But I see Brad, for example, ready to walk run through a wall of bricks, when it's like Monday 9 a.m. I mean, how do you guys go about really getting the right people, getting them excited, and building the right culture, in order to really push things forward?
there's a few things. Like the culture starts with how do you recruit and build the team. So in recruiting, I think there's a few things to look for. You look for, and this has changed as I've built the company. The first thing I always was looking for was just raw IQ. Is this person intelligent? Are they smart? Can they figure things out in a changing environment? But the next thing is actually EQ. And I think that's the one that I learned is actually, could be much more important, because everything is about teams of people working together. And whether that's your customers, your partners, or many teams inside the company, EQ is critically important. So we look for that. And then the third thing, which is, I learned that one the most recently, is the most important. The third attribute is courage, actually, because you're making so many bold bets with the business. And the people who join you early, they are in their own right entrepreneurial, right, and entrepreneurs. And so they're joining to go build something, and they have a vision too that is tied to your vision. And so I think finding people that have that courage and that excitement is critically important, because the only thing that's guaranteed in business, especially in the age of AI, is that what you're doing today and what you're doing in 12 months is going to change in some pretty big way. And what's going to happen in the next 5 years, in your business is going to be an incredible amount of change. And so you have to have people that are willing to be adaptable and bold.
So talking about people here, just to double click, obviously, we're talking about investors, employees, all of them, and you alluded to it earlier with investors, they are really betting on future, on possibility, on the vision, really. So question for you here is, if you were, let's say, to go to sleep tonight, and you have the snooze of a lifetime, and you wake up in a world where the vision of Superblocks is fully realized, what does that world look like?
That world looks like where the world's largest enterprises are basically running on Superblocks as their core operating system for their business operations. And that the way they're running is through a set of applications that every employee is using and building and maintaining themselves, but also through a set of AI agents that are these kind of peers that they can put to work, and they can go to sleep and have a snooze and have work done for them. And so I think that world is incredibly exciting. The technology wave that we're on is enabling that. And so I think that's really what gets me up in the morning, is that future of, hey, for a certain set of companies out there across the enterprise, they could be built on Superblocks. They could be running on Superblocks. And I think helping those companies achieve their goals and their missions in a pretty powerful way is super exciting.
That's amazing. So obviously we're talking about the future, but I want to talk about the past, and doing so with from a lens of reflection, no? And if I was to put you, let's say, into a time machine, right, in that regard, and I bring you back to those days, where maybe you were about to go to Y Combinator, or you were now that day coming out of the Yelp office, thinking about a world where you could be an entrepreneur and launch your own thing. Let's say you had the opportunity of being right there. Let's say you are at the main entrance of the Yelp office, and you see that younger Brad coming out, ready to rock the world with a venture. And you're able to stop that younger self, and you're able to give that younger self one piece of advice before launching a business. What would that be, and why, given what you know now?
The number one thing I would say is, no matter what happens in the journey of the business, there's always another move to be played. And you have to make that move bold. And at every single juncture in the business, you have to basically make a bold bet. And there's always, in every business, a way to get to the next level, a way to grow your business. And every entrepreneur in every company faces immense change. And even if like the story of someone like NVIDIA, right? That was not a straight up to the right, even though it is today the most successful, largest company. It was many twists and turns. And so I think the number one piece of advice is be bold and know that it's okay to go all in, because there's always a way you can evolve your business and your company with your customers. And as long as you're bold and you're able to make those bets, you'll always be able to continue and drive forward.
I love that. Brad, for the people that are listening that would love to reach out and say hi, what is the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who wants to try out Superblocks can go to superblocks.com. And we basically have the early access for Clark, the AI agent. And then I'm at Brad Menezes on Twitter, at BradMenezes on Twitter.
Amazing. Well, Brad, thank you so much for being on the Dealmaker Show today. It has been an absolute honor to have you with us.
Thank you, Alejandro. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for taking the time.